Law webinar about the Stolen Generations Reparation Scheme, currently operating in New South Wales until 30 June 2022. My name is Kerry Wright and I work in the Community Legal Education branch at Legal Aid New South Wales. I'm here today with Sue Ellen Hills, who is a solicitor with the Legal Aid New South Wales Civil Law Service for Aboriginal Communities, and Josh Scotland from the Legal Aid New South Wales Community Legal Education team. But Josh has also worked with the Classic team with Sue Ellen. So hi Sue Ellen, hi Josh. Before we start, I want to acknowledge and pay our respects to the traditional owners and custodians on whose land we are broadcasting from today, and to extend that respect to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people joining the webinar today or viewing the recording. So this webinar is aimed at people who work with stolen generations survivors. If you're a stolen generations survivor yourself and would like to get advice directly from a lawyer about your situation, you have the option of logging off now and speaking to a lawyer in the Classic team directly. The phone number is on the slide that you can see now, 1800 793 017 or 02 9219 5057. I'll definitely be getting those numbers out as well later on in the webinar. Today we'll be talking about compensation for members of the stolen generations, and I acknowledge this topic is sensitive. If at any time anything in the webinar triggers something or brings back bad memories, it's up to you whether you stay. You can choose when to leave. And as I've said earlier, it is being recorded, so you can watch the webinar at any time on the Legal Aid New South Wales YouTube channel. So this next slide coming up is an overview of what we'll cover today. So by the end of this webinar today, we hope you'll understand why reparation is available, what reparation is available, and that members of the stolen generations can get two types of reparations, who's eligible, how to apply, what happens when you get refused, which organisations can help members of the stolen generation apply for reparations, the impact that this will have on Centrelink, social housing and any fines or debts that the person has, where you can refer clients for help and for help with legal or financial issues, as well as help with healing and counselling. You'll notice on your control panel there's 3 handouts as well. These are fact sheets that have been prepared by Legal Aid New South Wales as well as Aboriginal Affairs, so feel free to download those fact sheets and use those as a reference as well. But there will be links to those resources in the email that follows the webinar. So we're going to start with a quick poll, which I'll launch now with you all. This poll asks the questions, do you work with stolen generation survivors? So there's 3 options to answer, yes, no, or unsure, but I work with Aboriginal elders. So Josh and Sue Ellen, I'm just waiting for people to vote. We've got about 50 people with us so far, which is fantastic. We really appreciate your time and for you to join us today. We've got people from regional New South Wales as well as the city. Okay, so most people have voted, so I'll close that and share the results. So you'll see there, 73% do work with members of the stolen generation, and a small number, 9% said no, and 18% said unsure, but they do work with Aboriginal elders. So that's really good to know that there's a good cross-section, and definitely a lot of people who are working with stolen generations. So we'll start now with you, Sue Ellen. So tell us about the Civil Law Service for Aboriginal Communities.
Okay, so thanks, Kerry. My name is Sue Ellen, and I'm a solicitor who works in Classic, and my paternal family is from the Wanneroo Nation. So Classic is a civil law service for Aboriginal communities, and we have around 20 staff, which consist of solicitors, legal support officers, paralegals, project officers, and financial counsellors. So it's a collaborative, holistic team. So the idea behind us is that we work with Aboriginal clients and deal with all of their civil legal needs. The other thing, we have around half of our staff are Aboriginal. And so this assists and informs us in providing culturally appropriate services. We also work very closely with other Aboriginal specific services to ensure that we're providing the right service for our clients. We travel, not quite at the moment, but we usually travel all through New South Wales to over 20 regional and remote locations in New South Wales.
Mm. And so not travelling at the moment, Sue Ellen, you're doing most of your work over the phone?
Yeah, so yesterday I look after Maury, that's my outreach clinic. So we were able to do an outreach clinic over the phone. So I was able to speak to quite a few clients. We can still work with our clients. We still work with our services. We're just doing things differently. But we do look forward to getting out there. But yeah, we've put in some really good systems. And I think last year, when there was the other outbreak, we learnt a lot, and so things were pretty seamless this time, trying to keep going with our services, making sure our clients are still engaged with us. So I think we're hanging in there.
Great, thank you. All right, so thanks, Sue Ellen. So let's find out about the Stolen Generations Reparation Scheme. Slides coming up now.
Okay, so the New South Wales government decided in July 2017 that some members of the stolen generations can apply for what we call repatriations, which is a monetary sum. So we'll talk more about who exactly can get repatriations later on. The main message of today is that you can call legal aid to get help to apply for these repatriations. Sometimes people aren't too sure whether they are members of the stolen generation, if they're eligible. So we just encourage everyone to give us a call and let us help you through that. So with the repatriations, if the government agree with the application, then the applicant is awarded $75,000 and an extra $7,000 for funeral funds. The Department of Aboriginal Affairs, who administer this Stolen Generations repat scheme, are also giving money for healing projects. You can speak to the New South Wales Department of Aboriginal Affairs by calling them on 1800 019 998 or going to the website to find out more about funding for healing projects. And I just want to note that photo, the very grim photo there, is Cootamundra Girls Home.
Thank you. Okay, so who's eligible to apply?
Okay, so the Stolen Gen scheme is available to living stolen generation survivors who were, so this is the actual eligibility, removed by, committed to, or otherwise came into the care of the New South Wales Aborigines Protection or Welfare Boards under the Aborigines Protection Act 1909 up until the Act was repealed on 2nd of June 1969. So that's the straight up eligibility. So some other things to note is that under this scheme, descendants aren't eligible, but there may be some money available if your family member was alive on the 2nd of December 2016. And that's the date that the New South Wales government announced the establishment of what's called the Funeral Assistance Fund. If you think you might meet that criteria, then you can get in contact with us to see if you're eligible for a funeral fund payment. Eligible stolen gen survivors can choose to receive a funeral assistance payment at the same time as their repat payment, or they can defer the payment and nominate a person to receive this at the point it's required. Some things to note with this scheme. So we talk about that it's not binding. So it's a scheme, and what that allows is for Aboriginal Affairs to look at an application more broadly. So it's not always a strict criteria, But from our experience, there are certain claims that won't get up. And these are ones where what we call the AWB, so the Aborigines Welfare Board, weren't involved, or if someone was removed after the 2nd of June 1969, these people are likely to not be eligible. The other thing is that Aboriginal affairs can depart from these guidelines, so it allows them a little bit more scope. If they're satisfied, it is in the interest of justice and equity to do so. And that's a really broad statement. So what we continue to encourage people is please get in contact with us or another lawyer about an application, because there may be arguments that can be made to have people who may not necessarily think they're eligible to have a successful claim.
Okay. And so, Sue Ellen, can people apply themselves or do they need help from a lawyer?
Look, clients can definitely apply themselves. Aboriginal affairs have made it as simple and trauma-informed as possible. For many clients, they know that they were stolen. You know, they either recall being taken or sent away by the authorities. So as long as it can be shown that the AWB, so the Aborigines Welfare Board, were involved, then these people would generally be eligible under the scheme. But in broad terms, the client puts in the application. Aboriginal Affairs will do a record search of all of the government records, and it's surprising how many records are actually available. And then they will grant the payment as long as they know that there was AWB involvement. But then for other clients, it's not as straightforward. And so they may need a solicitor to make an argument around the fact that they were actually removed. Sometimes we might need to do a wider search for documents. Sometimes we might be in contact with other family and get a statement from them about what they recall happened. The other thing is, because we've been doing a lot of these and we've been doing them for a while, we're also familiar with the way that the AWB worked. So sometimes when we speak to our clients and asking them lots and lots of questions, a name can be mentioned or a certain place or a procedure that the client recalls and that we know that that may actually be AWB involvement. In some cases, though, people were removed by the Child Welfare Department, not actually the AWB. This doesn't necessarily mean that you won't be eligible, because it may take us to make an argument around, even though it wasn't the AWB involved, they were around in the background. So they don't always fall squarely with the eligibility criteria.
Okay, thanks, Sue Ellen. So we'll just bring up this slide. Can you tell us why it's important to also understand the Aboriginal Apprenticeship Scheme?
Yeah, so look, this is much less well known than the Stolen Generations people. And it's a certain group of people who were forcibly sent away from their families by the AWB, and they were made to do domestic work, work as a farmhand, or other work. So they actually may be eligible under the Stolen Gen scheme. Sometimes people in these situations may not be aware or consider themselves to be part of the stolen generation because they weren't taken and placed in a home. But there can be an argument to be made that they will be eligible under it. So sort of some general ideas of what happened with many of these people is that they were taken and they were placed in homes or farms. They often didn't receive any wages, or sometimes they sort of received a small amount as pocket money. And this is actually now called stolen wages because they were put into a government trust accounts. In these cases, we've done a few and we found there's actually really little records on this. And what we've been able to do is search around and get statements from clients, sometimes like a stat deck. You know, one of our solicitors got out a map of New South Wales and they tried to zoom in and eventually found out the farm that the client was on, because they didn't quite recall where they were, but they remembered catching a train for a certain distance, and then they got off the train, and then they drove for a period of time. And that's the type of work that we can do to assist these type of clients. One thing though, it is important to remember, there were a lot of Aboriginal people who were on a reserve or a station and were sent to work. But if you didn't actually leave the reserve or station sort of on a permanent basis, you probably are not eligible for the scheme. So what we're really trying to say is that for many clients, it's really just not straightforward. There may be scope for us to make an argument that your circumstances may allow you to fit in with under the scheme. So it's really worth getting some legal advice to see whether you may be eligible.
Great, thank you. So, Sue Ellen, can you now tell us who's not eligible for the scheme?
Okay, so I sort of said it a little bit earlier, but unfortunately, children of stolen generation survivors are not eligible. You must be alive at the time to make a stolen generation application. It's usually, and I do say usually, if you were removed after the 2nd of June 1969. There are also many parents who were forced by the AWB or Child Welfare to give their consent for their children to be taken. Where this happens though, and we can show that it was actually AWB involvement, we can make an argument that those people who were taken should actually be eligible. But if we can't show that the parents were forced to give up their children, Department of Aboriginal Affairs is unlikely to find that those people are eligible. So again, and we do keep saying it, we really encourage everyone to come to us for advice. Tell us your story and what happened to you, and we can see whether we might be able to argue for you to be eligible under the screen. A lot of these applications just aren't straightforward.
Okay, all right. So thanks, Sue Ellen. We'll just get you to take us through the application form now. That's coming up for everyone to see.
Okay. Look, it's a 3-page form. It's reasonably simple. You just need to fill it in, usual stuff, name, date of birth, address. When there's a section in there as well that allows you to have like a nominee, so someone who, if there's Department of Aboriginal Affairs have questions, they can contact you. So for our clients, we're usually that contact, so we can deal with any questions, which reduces the trauma for our clients at having to either retell their story or take phone calls and that type of thing. You'll need 2 types of ID. So Aboriginal Affairs will accept birth certificate, passport, driver's license, pensioner cards, Medicare, healthcare cards, or bank account cards. But we do know that for many Aboriginal people, they do struggle to actually have ID. So if you do have clients who want to make an application but don't have any ID, they can get help getting a birth certificate through Pathfinders, which is the National Aboriginal Birth Certificate Program. And I believe that there is a link in the email that comes to help for anyone who needs that information.
Yes, definitely. So the email that follows this webinar will have a link to Pathfinders and also a link to the application form. So, so you'll have that information at your fingertips after. So take us through the process, Sue Ellen.
Okay, so for sort of a straightforward application, fill in the form. It goes to Department of Aboriginal Affairs. They will check through all of the government records to confirm that you were removed. If they're not clear or there's some concern about it, Aboriginal Affairs will be in contact with the applicant, or if you have someone down as a nominee, they will be in contact with them. It's really important, if you put the application in yourself, that you keep Aboriginal Affairs up to date with any change in address or phone number. Also, we know a lot of our survivors are becoming elderly or have some illnesses. If you think there's a reason that your application should be given priority, so it should be done quickly, you need to let them know, and so that can be highlighted with Aboriginal Affairs. Look, the other thing, if Aboriginal Affairs decide to refuse your application and not give you the repatriations, you can ask for a review. That's allowable in this scheme. And what a review means is that you're asking Aboriginal Affairs to look at it again. Usually though, if you're having a review, it would be a great idea to get some legal assistance with that so that you can have someone go through your application. So either legal aid can do that or some of your local community legal centres as well.
Okay. So thanks, Sue Ellen. We'll now have a look at the type of help that the Legal Aid Civil Law Service for Aboriginal Communities team can provide. So the first thing we'll look at is requesting records.
Yeah, so look, we do lots and lots of record searches. Usually, we'll contact Department of Communities and Justice and get their care leaver records. And look, sometimes they don't necessarily say, yep, that person was removed by their parents, but there's language and comments that can allude to someone being removed because they were Aboriginal. And so we will look through, hundreds and hundreds of documents just to see what we can find within that. So just because something comes up, we may get records that start from 1971 or 72, which is after the scheme for those has closed. But we can see in there that there's either a lot of information or there is a lot of comment about the family being Aboriginal and that type of thing. So that can inform us to keep digging further. Aboriginal Affairs also have a family history record search. So if we are doing that, we will also not just ask for the records of our client, we'll also look broader. So we will look at their parents or their grandparents and try and track the history of that family and any involvement that Aboriginal Welfare Board have had in their lives. Some of our clients have been adopted, so we will get the adoption records and read about the reasons why that adoption went up. Many of the clients were placed in religious homes. So if the records aren't clear through Aboriginal Affairs, we'll actually go to those homes and do a record search with them. And we can sometimes read the reasons why they were placed in the home. Because it's worth checking because there's often Aboriginal Affairs correspondence in those, and that may allude to the child being removed due to them being Aboriginal. So there's lots of different records we can look for. There's lots of different things that we look for in those records to try and formulate an argument for people who may not have a straightforward application.
Great, thank you. And applying for reviews.
Yeah, so we do a lot of reviews for clients, and it's a really important process. So if you are declined or you have a client who is declined, we really encourage you to be in contact with us so we can go through the application and see what we can do to formulate an argument to allow your client to fit within the scheme guidelines. Sometimes if we've put the application in and we know that Aboriginal Affairs are going to refuse it, we'll actually ask them to hold off making a determination. We'll go off, as I said, go back, gather documents, get further statements, ask family to see if we can bolster up that application, and then we will resubmit it. So I think at the moment, Classic have done about 100 reviews, and we've got a lot of expertise in this area. We sort of work quite collaboratively to see what we can do to help our clients.
Great. And I understand the Classic team have had some success helping the clients with these reviews. Do you want to tell us about one or two of them?
Yeah, sure. I can. I had one client who was declined. There was scarce records on the family, but the client was really sure that the Aboriginal Welfare Board had been involved with their family. So as part of our review, we did have to go back over the timeline with the client, and we really try not to do that because we understand it's incredibly traumatic for many, many people. But with this client, we did. And then as we were speaking and asking the many, many questions that us solicitors do, the client mentioned a name, and it was a very particular name, and we had recalled that as being someone who worked for the AWB. They recalled this person coming to their home frequently, and from that, we were able to do further statement, do further submissions, and it was enough for them actually to be successful because we could prove that AWB had had a significant involvement in that family, even though there was very few records, and ultimately that their removal was because of the AWB involvement. So it's really worth getting back in contact with us to see how we can help.
Great. Okay, so I think we'll bring you in now, Josh. Thanks for sitting there patiently waiting. Have you got any stories about any people you've assisted with this scheme?
Yeah, I guess it's similar to what Sue Ellen was saying, that sometimes we will have cases and Aboriginal Affairs will acknowledge this, that the records that they have are not perfect. Anytime there are records, there are going to be things that are missing. And I think it's relatively common that there will be large gaps in the records, or just not everything will be covered. So I think that there is a real place, depending on the client, to step in, and if that client wishes, as Sue Ellen said, not every client wants to do this, but if that client is willing to share their story, and we can take that statement, even in the absence of records, it's still possible. And I've definitely had this experience of where there's no records have been found, but after taking a statement with the client, we're able to persuade Aboriginal Affairs on the basis of the client's statement that they should be eligible under the scheme. And I think for some people, it can be quite a healing experience to share their story as well. Like it's really person specific around what people want to do, but there definitely are people that just don't want to go back into those memories. But yeah, there are other people that can share their story and find that to be healing, and especially getting, if they do get that acknowledgement from Aboriginal Affairs of what they've been through, that can be really powerful for some clients as well.
Great, thank you. So we're now going to chat about the other reparations options available to Aboriginal clients. You're going to take us through this, Josh?
Yeah, sure. So I guess the first one that we've been talking about is the Stolen Generations Reparation Scheme. And that is trying to give that payment of $75,000 is trying to give some form of recognition for the act of removal, for that person being removed from their family. It's not, the Stolen Generations Reparation Scheme is not trying to give reparations or any kind, it's not trying to acknowledge all of the suffering that may have happened after that. And I think that's really an important point, especially legally, because it means that somebody could get a payment under the Stolen Generations Reparation Scheme, and that person, if they also, if they experienced harm after that, they could also get compensation in addition to the payment that they get from the Stolen Generations Reparation Scheme. And so that compensation could come from, if we jump down to the third bullet point there, it could come from going to a private lawyer and having a private lawyer put in a personal injury claim of sorts, where basically that person is suing the government for what happened and what they went through. And that, if you compare that to the Stolen Generations Reparation Scheme, where there is the possibility that you only need to provide your name, address, and 2 forms of ID, basically, and for some people, they don't need to go into their story at all. You can see that experience is much easier emotionally than if you're going to a private lawyer and having to go into all of the experiences that have happened to you, which you would have to do if you went to that private lawyer. You would need to tell your story. So that is a much harder option, but it is also an option that allows you to get compensation, and once again, some kind of recognition for all of the other harm that some people have experienced after being removed or stolen. So it's an option that is there for people, and I think it's good for people at the very least to be aware of what those options are. The other option is the second bullet point there, which is the National Redress Scheme for people who were removed or were in an institution and suffered sexual abuse. And we've got the number for the Community Legal Centre there, No More. And that service just has a lot of experience, and it's free confidential advice and assistance that you can get to apply for the National Redress Scheme, which is a payment of up to $150,000. Is there anything else that you'd add to that, Sue Ellen? Or
Sorry, I'm muting. No, I think so. It's just, yeah, there's just not one scheme. So if you're a stolen generation survivor, there may be other avenues for you to receive compensation, or you may not be eligible for stolen gen, but you may be eligible for other repats or compensation.
Yeah, and I guess the only other thing I'd say is if you are at all unsure whether you're eligible or whether there's any type of compensation available for you, just get in contact, because it's good to speak to a lawyer and talk about your specific situation, and we can talk about, there may be options in addition to the 3 options that we've given there, but those are the 3 main options that people will have.
Okay, thank you. And the number for No More will also be in the email that we send out after the webinar. So thanks, Josh. Let's talk now about some issues that might come up after someone gets a reparations payment. And we'll start with Centrelink. This is coming up now.
Yeah, so I guess for those Stolen Generations members who are successful and who also receive a Centrelink benefit, the basic thing is that there was a determination that was made back in 2017 that says that any payment made under the Stolen Generations Reparation Scheme is not considered income for the purposes of assessing Centrelink payments. So that's good news. However, you do need to tell Centrelink within 14 days of receiving the reparations payment. And if you keep the payment in your bank account, then any interest, or if you invest that money, or if you are generating money from the reparations payment, then that amount that you're generating would be applied fortnightly. So that may result in any Centrelink benefit reducing accordingly. So I guess it's just something to be aware of. The other thing is just to note that if you decide, and if a Stolen Generations survivor decides to give some of that money to family, it would be good to speak to a lawyer first around what the implications might be for that family member, because they may not have that same protection that the Stolen Generations survivor has as the person receiving the payment under the Stolen Generations Reparation Scheme. The only other thing I'd say is that the Australian Tax Office's Indigenous Helpline 131080 could be a good option for people to call if they want to get a little more clarity around exactly how that works. Yes,
and that phone number's in the email that's following the webinar. Okay, what about social housing, Josh? Is there impact on that?
Yeah, so once again, won't affect their housing means assessment if somebody is in a social housing property. And that's also from 2017. Yeah, so good news once again that the different government departments are speaking to each other so that you don't get an unfair outcome in this way.
Yes, and one of the handouts on the control panel that is there for you to download, people in the webinar, is specifically talks about the Centrelink and housing and the decisions around that. So we'll now talk about debts and fines, Josh. What do people need to think about in that area?
So I guess the first point is that any Stolen Generations reparations payment should not be used to pay state debt or fines. So to protect the payment, the steps to take are to call Aboriginal Affairs or call the Revenue New South Wales Advocates line, and we can help clients to do that. And that's just to notify them that received a reparations payment, so it shouldn't be subject to any kind of debt recovery process. I mean, you can just kind of imagine that if somebody's just received $75,000 and if that person also had a significant fine or something, like just how horrible it would be for that person to have finally had acknowledgement of what they've been through, only to have it taken. So yeah, so that shouldn't happen, and you can definitely speak to your lawyer, and that if anything like that happens, but we can also take proactive action. And one of the things, and I think we talk about this on a lot of our webinars, is that whenever we see clients, we are doing a legal health check to find out what all of their different legal issues are. So it's just kind of going through and asking, does the client have any fines? Do they have any debts? And a number of other legal issues. But I guess in particular, in relation to this issue, it's really helpful for us to know if the client has any loans or has any debts, so that we can take steps to resolve it before anything happens. So for example, if somebody had a loan and they're being chased by a credit provider, it's really good for us to be able to resolve that or refer it to a financial counsellor so that that issue can be resolved before receiving the reparations payment.
Okay, thank you. And do you talk to people about wills as well?
Yeah, I think it's really important for everyone to draft a will, just because if, it just kind of gives you, I think it makes it simpler and easier for other people. And in particular, with the Stolen Generations survivors, you can get free or substantially reduced wills prepared by the Law Society. So by solicitors through the Law Society. And if you come to us, we can make that referral and connect you to the Law Society so that you can get that will drafted and makes things simpler. And you get the choice of where you want your assets to go.
Yes.
And can also take into account cultural considerations as well. Express your wishes.
There's in the email following the webinar, there's that phone number for the New South Wales Law Society, but also a link to a resource, the Aboriginal Wills Handbook, which is the New South Wales Trustee and Guardian have produced. So that might be something that the webinar participants would be interested in having a look at. And can they get help for free with their finance?
Yeah, so yeah, definitely anybody can speak to a financial counsellor and get that free assistance. Have a conversation about what that you're expecting, or you have received the Stolen Generations Reparation Scheme payment, or even if you haven't. I mean, it's just a great thing that you have available to be able to speak to a financial counsellor to talk about your financial situation and some different options that you might have in your financial with your financial situation. The other thing that I'd say is that that you could also, it's very much up to anybody who's successful under this scheme. Obviously, it's very much up to them. Whatever they want to do with the money, they can do. But if somebody did want to speak to a financial advisor as well to get advice around what they wanted to do with the money, that you can search for that on the, there's a list that we can circulate as well of financial advisors as well, and how you can search for one. I guess it's also that thing of kind of being aware that if word does spread that you have come into this money, then it can be a good thing to set up a separate bank account where you're sure that you're the only one that can have access to it. But I mean, I think this kind of thing is really just a conversation that you have with a professional or with someone that you trust, and you talk about what you're wanting to do. And the other thing is that if word spreads, that sometimes you can get people who seek to take advantage of that. So it can be good to put up, there's these do not knock stickers that you can put up on your house, on your front door. And if you've got one of those and someone knocks, so this could be somebody who's kind of working for a business and you're worried that they're going to take advantage of you, you can put up these stickers, and that can be a good way to make sure that you don't have to deal with that as much as possible.
Definitely. Okay. Thanks, Josh. So now you're going to tell us about a range of organisations set up to support stolen generations survivors.
Yeah, so there's a few different names there up on the slide. I might actually go from the bottom,
Okay.
which is just that the Stolen Generations organisations. I think if somebody's gone through that experience, I've definitely had clients tell me that it's the most helpful thing is to speak to people who've had that shared experience and can understand what you've been through. But as I said previously, it is a very personal thing, the healing side of this after going through such a difficult experience. I think it is good to feel like you've got, you know, friends and family as well, which isn't listed there, but I think it's just such an important part of any kind of support. And then some of the other options that we've listed there is the Wattle Place, which is run by Relationships Australia. And for our community workers listening, just get in touch for any of these options if you need any more detail from us, like if you struggle to find it. That Wattle Place is specifically for forgotten Australians, anyone who experienced institutional or other out-of-home care as children. People of stolen generations who are placed there can get that support. There's also, and just trying to make sure that the support that you're getting is culturally appropriate. There's also Link Up is a really good organisation to try to connect you to that. I mean, obviously they offer the service of connecting you to family, but also in terms of counselling, bringing them home counsellors at your local Aboriginal medical service can be an option as well. And going to your local GP and requesting a mental health treatment plan is another option where you can get that Medicare rebate for that plan. So I guess the real message is that there is support out there. And yeah, we think it's an important part of our role to help connect clients to that support so that we can assist with the legal, and there's other people that can assist with providing that psychological, cultural, and spiritual support.
Great, thank you. All right, so thanks Sue Ellen and Josh and everyone for participating in today's webinar. If you want to make a referral to the Legal Aid New South Wales Civil Law Communities, you can see the details up on the screen now. If you want to ask Josh or Sue Ellen any questions, you can type those in your control panel now. So the phone number for CLASAC is the 1800 793 017, and if you need to, you can use the National Relay Service to get in touch with them. They also have an email, clsac@legalaid.newsouthwales.gov.au, and on the Legal Aid New South Wales website, under what we do civil law, you'll find a page specifically about the Civil Law Service for Aboriginal Communities, which is a great page because it also gives details of where they do their regular outreach. So
Could I
someone's
jump
asked
in,
oh yeah,
Kerry,
sure.
and just make a quick appeal before we get to the questions, that we're really worried about people not finding out about the Stolen Generations Reparation Scheme and missing out. I mean, I would just be really worried about if somebody doesn't apply, you know, hopefully as soon as possible, but if somebody hasn't applied before the 30th of June next year, it would just be terrible for somebody to miss out on this opportunity to get the recognition. So I guess my appeal or my request would be just for any community workers listening to help us get the word out, that if you know anybody else that's working with stolen generation survivors, please help get the word out and help connect them to us so that we can help them apply to the scheme and hopefully help people to get reparations and get some acknowledgement for what people have been through for people who want to go down that path. Yeah, we see it as really urgent because we know time's going to go quickly.
And that's very relevant to our first question, which is, do you have any advice about raising the scheme with clients? Because you saw that 18% of people on the webinar said they were unsure, but they do work with Aboriginal elders. So Do you have any advice, Sue Ellen or Josh, about how to raise it with people?
Look, I think sometimes you can raise it in sort of an indirect way. You know, you can start talking about, I was talking with such and such, and, or I went to this webinar and they were talking about stolen gen and that it's ending, the end of June 2022. And sometimes you can just sort of initiate the conversation that way instead of directly saying, so, hey, have you been a stolen generation survivor if they haven't come forward? So maybe, attending this webinar might be a really good way to start getting some conversations going gently in your community or with the people you work with.
I guess we've got posters that you can put up if you're working in particular services, so you can have those up on the wall, and that could just be a good conversation starter. Or have you heard about the reparation scheme? And I guess it's around that thing of that nobody needs to apply, but I guess my view would be that it's good for people to know about the scheme and have the option to. So it's gentle, but giving people the option.
Yeah, and it's, the application is a 3-page application. So, you can get that in, and then if work needs to be done later, then that's stuff that, we can get done at a later point. But the form can go in, you can lodge your application, and then, if needed to be, things can be done in the background. So don't be waiting to if it's starting to get close to the end of the scheme, then don't be waiting for lots of documents or statements or anything else to be made.
Okay. Someone from Link Up New South Wales has asked, can they cross-promote the contact details on their website? That would be very welcome for them to do that, I imagine. So someone's just asked a question about reparations if they're not the stolen gens, but they may have had a terrible impact between foster homes and forced to move around. Would that be more of a referral to Know More, do you think, Josh?
Yeah, I mean, either that or a referral to a private solicitor who does that type of personal injury work where people have had horrible experiences, and getting advice around whether it's worth pursuing from a lawyer who practices in that area. Yeah. Anything you'd add to that, Sarah?
No, I think that's the thing, sometimes people will just say, oh, I had a bad time when I was in foster care, and won't actually say specifics, which is completely understandable. But I think if someone is raising that they had a tough time, may mean that there is a lot more that's happened. So services like Know More for clients who are sexually abused are fantastic. They're really good at working with clients to get the story from them, or as Josh said, a referral to a civil lawyer any type of those abuse claims are actually a personal injury claim. And so it's a very niche area, and there's some really good lawyers who work in that space that can give some really honest, straight up advice about whether they may have a claim directly against the organisation.
Okay, and so they could call Classic and just have a chat about their client situation, and you'll give them an idea of the best referral?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Just get them to call, or you can call as well, please.
That's great. And that person's asked about fees, but that's something else you can talk to them about, whether there's private lawyers that do this pro bono, or whether, what sort of fees might be involved. Is that right, Josh?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it will depend on the firm. I know there's one particular firm that does a lot of this work who will charge their fees separately to the government. So if they've sued the government and they're successful under that claim, so they don't take their fees off the actual compensation awarded. They charge that separately to the government. But yeah, it depends on the firm, and definitely good to make sure that you've understood that agreement before you sign anything with a private law firm.
Okay. And there's a question here, are there avenues for people who are adopted but not placed in an institution?
So if they were adopted and sort of we spoke a little bit about that, that adoption may have been a forced adoption, and it may have been with AWB involvement. So there may be some eligibility under the stolen gen. If you're talking about someone who may have been adopted and then suffered sexual or physical abuse after that, that actually becomes quite a complicated question. And so if they have suffered sexual abuse after they were adopted, I would suggest they contact No More or a private lawyer to have a discussion. But they are very complicated, those kind of matters, unfortunately. But if it's a stolen gen and they're adopted, yeah, or they just were adopted, get them to give us a call, because there may be some underlying reasons why that adoption occurred, such as AWB involvement.
Okay. Well, while we wait and see if there's any more questions, I might launch our second poll that we'd had for today. So for people to tell us, do you feel more confident talking to stolen generation survivors about the reparations scheme after doing this webinar? Yes, no, or unsure, but I know who to call if I need help. So people are voting. It looks like we're going to come right in on time, which is fantastic. So we'll just see if see how we go with people voting. Had a few thank yous already, which is great. So I'll close that poll and share the results with you both. So there's some good feedback. 92% said yes, and the other 8% said unsure, but I know who to call if I need help.
That is perfect. So couldn't ask for anything more. Just give us a call, please. Yeah,
that's right. That's exactly what we wanted people to feel more confident and know who to call. Yeah, so someone's just made a note. It's not just one generation. Yeah, that's right. It's more than one generation. Exactly. So I'll just bring up this last slide, which is if you're watching this webinar as a recording and you have any questions, you can send them to cla@legalaid.newsouthwales.gov.au and we'll pass on your questions to the Civil Law Service for Aboriginal Communities to answer them. If you have a client with legal problems, as Josh said, there's lots of legal problems as well for many people. You can call Law Access New South Wales on 1300 888 529 and they'll talk to you about options in terms of referrals and what's available online. So I think most people are just saying thank you. So I think we might have oh, someone's asked, where can you find a link to the webinar? We're recording the webinar and then we'll be putting it up on the Legal Aid New South Wales YouTube channel. So I should have that up by later this afternoon. If you go to our website, our homepage, and you see the icon for YouTube, if you click on that, that'll take you to the web page. But we can also send out information after this webinar to you all as well. So,
and if anybody wants I was just going to say, if anybody wants an individual session, like for your organisation, like very happy to come and talk to other staff members at a staff meeting or anything like that.
Yeah, that's a good point. The Class Act team are more than happy to Zoom into a staff meeting or, you know, when allowed, attend organisations to talk about this and answer any specific questions you might have for the clients of your organisation. And also just a really clear reminder, as Josh was stressing, that it ends on the 30th of June 2022. It's important that we get the message out and get as many people into the scheme as possible so they don't miss out. And also there's feedback link after this webinar, so we appreciate your feedback, and also an email will follow this webinar with lots of links for you to follow up the information we talked about today. So yeah, I think that's it. I think we're just getting mostly thank yous, and thank you, Josh and Sue Ellen, for your time today and this really informative webinar. So
Thank you.
great. I'll say
Thanks,
goodbye
Chris.
to you all. Okay, bye.
Hey.